Hi everybody, it's me again. Welcome to another episode of VitalORBit. Excuse my voice, I just had a weird little flu, and even though I'm not sick, this is still happening. I posted a video of me yesterday at the ski hill, and there's some hacking involved, so hopefully that won't happen now. But if it does, I know that you'll forgive me, because that's how cool you are. What am I going to talk about today? So I'm 60 years old this year. Crazy, I know. But I was diagnosed with a goofy, rare autoimmune disease in 2010. So it's 2026 right now. So I've had 16 years of bonus time. And I've learned some really solid lessons in that 16 years. And this was actually one of the big reasons I wanted to start this channel, is to share some of that hard-earned wisdom that I've acquired over the last 16 years. Wisdom that I absolutely did not have when this all started, because let's face it, I was like everybody else, and if I ever needed to see a doctor for any reason, it was this kind of a relationship. There's the doctor telling me how it is, and here's me taking it and listening to every word as if it's gospel. And I have a ton of appreciation for the medical profession and doctors. But when you have a chronic illness, especially one that's kind of rare, it is way more beneficial for both you and your doctor if you take the driver's seat, if you become the pilot and you work in a partnership with your doctor rather than a patriarchal, kind of dominant, submissive relationship, which has been the kind of relationships that people have had with the medical profession for decades and decades. That's how medicine was in the old days. But now we live in a different environment where patients actually have a ton of access to data. And the data can be a blessing and a curse. And I know that some doctors don't appreciate you going in and taking this kind of a role. And in my personal opinion, that's when it's time to look for a different doctor, because it is your body. You're the one that has to live with the consequences of anything missed or any errors made. So I think it's super important to become an active participant in the healing journey. And there's a book that I read in 2015. I'm going to put a link to it in the description on Amazon, that you could buy it. I've just signed up to be an Amazon affiliate, so I might make a few pennies out of the sale. It costs you nothing extra, but just so full disclosure, so you know. And I haven't seen this book for a while. I had it before, and our garage burnt down in 2019, and I think that book went up in smoke with that event. But it really made an impact on me. And the book is by Topol, and I'll put a link to it. And it's called The Patient Will See You Now. And it completely reverses that doctor-patient relationship. And it made such a powerful impact on me, because I was already that patient. As I've said before in my story, I was a little bit obsessive about keeping all my labs. And this was before you could access your labs online. So I was going to our hospital, and every time I did my blood work, I would go in the next day and ask for a hard copy of my labs. So I had this giant binder that was like that thick of all my labs, so that I could see, and I would write down when, I would have a flare, so I could look back and see if there was anything showing in my lab results that would give me clues for future flares. So I've been that geeky kind of patient forever. But that book, it gave me reason and it validated my obsessiveness. And I have a story for you that actually is a perfect example of this. So in 2016, I believe, I had a massive flare. And at that point, I had a cavitating lesion that showed up in my x-ray. So it was 3 millimeter lesion that was a perfectly round little lesion. And a cavitating lesion goes through your lung. So it creates a hole. And I went to my doctor, my rheumatologist, and she wanted to put me on Rituxan, which is B-cell ablation. So basically what it does is it eliminates pretty much most of your B cells in your body and resets your whole immune system, your adaptive immune system. So all of the memories that you've had from previous vaccines, previous infections, that all lives in your B cells. So you blow that out, and whatever is triggering them into misbehaving is in theory now gone. So you start basically, you become a brand new baby with just a few B cells, I think, hiding in joints and stuff, but most of your B cells are ablated. So I was about to go in for a B-cell ablation to stop my flare, because I've done my whole lifetime supply of chemotherapy, because I did about almost 2 years of chemotherapy, and that's beyond what you're supposed to do in a single lifetime. So I can't really do chemo anymore, like the hardcore chemo. So B-cell ablation it is, but my doctor wanted to make sure that what was going on in my lungs was not an infection. So she sent me to a pulmonologist who was like the coolest dude ever. Every single doctor that my rheumatologist has sent me to has been so cool. The cool docs hang out together. So I go to this pulmonologist, and he's this rad guy, wearing Vans in the office and a Hawaiian sort of shirt. Totally looks like he's skateboarded to work. And we're talking, and I had to do a pulmonology test before I actually got in to see him. So I'm doing my pulmonology test, and I didn't tell him this part, but I saw one of his techs outside that was one of the people administering pulmonology tests. She wasn't administering it to me, but she was sitting out there, and she was like, she had a magazine there, so she's licking her fingers and flipping the page, licking her finger, flipping the page. And then this old gentleman sits in front of her, and that same finger that she's been flipping the page with, she grabs a little pulmonology mouthpiece, opens it up, and with that finger gives it to him. And at that point, I was, really self-conscious about introducing germs into my system. And it made me cringe. And it just brought to me that, you can have everything running really smoothly, and it just takes one person who doesn't take their job super seriously that can throw a wrench in the whole system for you personally. It's not going to make any difference to that office or her work or anything, but it might make a difference to that patient. And it just rattled me a little bit. So I do my pulmonology test. I go in to see the doc, and he starts telling me, he saw my x-rays, saw my cavitating lesions, saw the other lesions, that the granulomas were dropping in my lungs. And basically what he wanted to do was scope my lungs to make sure that it's not an infection. And what I had just witnessed outside was like, no, I'm not into that. So I, on the spot, came up with an idea. And it was a really freaking awesome idea where we could actually establish whether that was an infection or whether it was Wegener's without having to go inside. And I told him, I said, things happen. I don't want to introduce an outside object into my lungs just before I blow my immune system to smithereens. I just feel like that's just not the right thing to do. And I said, you could have just one nurse do something wrong and it can screw me up. I didn't tell him what I had seen outside. He goes, oh no, my staff are wonderful and great. And I'm sure that 99.9% of them are. But I was just like, no, you know what? I have an idea. And I gave him my idea. And this was my idea. My idea was I take high doses of prednisone for a week and a half or 2 weeks. And we take a baseline x-ray of my lungs. And we already had one, which is what he was looking at. So we used that x-ray. I continue taking pred. 4 days later, we take another x-ray. 4 days later, we take another x-ray. And I said to him, if I have an infection, the prednisone is an immune suppressant. So that cavitating lesion that I have, which I was 100% sure that it was Wegener's, just because of all the other associated feelings in my body that you can't really describe to a doctor, but after I had been, 6 years as a Wegener's patient now, so I was really getting the hang of it. So I knew it was Wegener's, so I just had to convince the docs that it's Wegener's so that we can just get on with the treatment. But I said to him, so I'm taking prednisone, and I was on a high dose. I think I was on 60 milligrams. And I said, if that cavitating lesion in the next x-ray and then the following x-ray is bigger, then we know it's an infection. If it stays the same or it shrinks, we know it's Wegener's, because the steroids actually decrease the inflammation and all the symptoms, and they shrink the lesions. And if it was an infection, the steroids, which is an immune suppressant, would actually show a bigger lesion with each subsequent x-ray. And I could see him there, sitting there in front of me in his Vans and his beach shirt. And he's thinking, and he's rubbing his chin. He's like, that is such a good idea. And I was just inside, celebrating because he validated my idea as being good, and we didn't have to go and scope me. And that involves, getting put under, going into the hospital, introducing all kinds of unnecessary risks into a system that is about to lose all of its immunity. So for me, it was just such an awesome moment. And that's what we did. He sent me home, and he ended up giving me 3 requisitions for x-rays. I continued my steroids. My x-rays actually showed the lesion shrinking. So we knew that it was Wegener's. As soon as, I took my 3rd x-ray, he called my rheumatologist and we set up a Rituxan infusion, and I blew that flare out of the water. However, I had been on the steroids so long, and it was already my 3rd or 4th time being on steroids. So with each subsequent time going on steroids, you blow up a lot quicker. And by the time I ended up getting into the Rituxan infusion, I was already fully blown up. Like, I hate steroids for that so much. My face blew up so fast and so hard that I could barely see, because my cheeks got so big and my eyes ended up getting squished, and you have a hard time breathing. Everything inside you gets all swollen and gross. Oh, bleh, hate it. But I saved myself from having a lung scope. And I really give credit to that doctor, that pulmonologist, because he was open. He didn't let his ego drive the relationship. And we ended up coming out with a pretty cool, elegant solution to a problem that could have gone either way and could have been really bad if it was an infection, but it turned out to not be an infection. And I think that book, The Patient Will See You Now, is a great example of how you, the patient, can take ownership of the process of healing. And it is your body. And we live in a society where our medical system is quite overburdened right now, and even more so after COVID, where we lost a whole bunch of medical practitioners because they had the balls to stand their ground. And this is the time to be your own advocate and to try and find a doctor or work with your doctor in a symbiotic relationship where you both can contribute, and it's not patriarchal where they're the parent and you're the child and you're told what to do. That doesn't benefit anybody or anything except for maybe a hungry ego. And I know that some doctors don't like that. I said that before, and I've run into some like that, and I don't see them anymore. So the doctors actually work for us, and we get to choose. We get to choose who's going to be our doctor, because especially with a chronic illness, you're in it for life. And it is so important to have that relationship with your doctor where you're both trying to figure out the puzzles together. And it's on you as much as it's on them. So if you want to read that book, it's much more eloquent than anything that I've put here. What I'm presenting is my own experience and an example of how you can save yourself a lot of grief by being involved and participating and calling the shots for your own healing journey. So, sending you all tons of love. Cheers, me and my chamomile, trying to get healthy again. And until next time, love you guys. Bye.